I got angry. A strange anger that does not pass even after you find the answer. I spent 3 months rereading the same historical accounts about those 3 days. 3 months of waking up at 2 in the morning, making coffee in the dark, and sitting at the table with the same books open in front of me. Every time I closed the books, I felt more bothered. Not by what the text said, by what they went out of their way to omit. What if they lied? That is the phrase that would not let me sleep. What if the greatest miracle in history was simply a covered-up survival? I was raised deeply religious. For decades, the resurrection was not just a story to me. It was not a metaphor. It was not a moral lesson. It was the absolute bedrock of my entire existence. I was taught, with absolute certainty, that the Roman execution was flawless, that the empty tomb 3 days later was the ultimate, unquestionable proof of divine victory. We all were. We were told to build our lives on that empty tomb. We were told that everything we hoped for, everything we believed about the universe, rested on the absolute fact that a dead man woke up. You do not question that. You just do not. When you are sitting in a pew on a Sunday morning, surrounded by people who have based their marriages, their child-rearing, their entire moral compass on this singular event, questioning it feels like a physical violence against them. It feels like betrayal. But when you start to deconstruct, when you actually examine the medical and historical anomalies surrounding those 3 days, a terrifying question begins to echo in the silence of your mind. It starts as a whisper. Then it becomes a shout. If the Roman executioners were so efficient, how could he survive? But then again, if he did not die, it explains the resurrection perfectly. If they lied about his death, what else have they been lying about all these years? I could not stop thinking about the absolute censorship. The Church strictly forbids any discussion about alternative theories. They do not just disagree with them, they eradicate them. They brand them as heresy. They burn the texts. They excommunicate the thinkers. Why hide it so fiercely if it is not true? That is what I needed to understand. Not just the history, the silence, the institutional panic at the mere suggestion that things did not happen exactly the way we were told. I did not want to open this door. I really did not. When you start pulling at the thread of the crucifixion, you are not just questioning a historical event, you are unraveling the fabric of your own salvation. At least, that is how it feels. It feels like you are committing a crime just by thinking about it. You feel the eyes of your community on your back, even when you are alone in your kitchen at 3 in the morning. I remember looking at the traditional narrative, the timeline. He was on the cross for a few hours, not days, like typical victims of Roman crucifixion. A few hours. Medical experts, the ones who study ancient execution methods, conclude that surviving Roman crucifixion was virtually impossible. They point out that before the cross, the severe scourging caused immense blood loss. It would lead to a pre-shock state. Furthermore, they argue that professional Roman executioners had every incentive to ensure death. Failing to execute a prisoner resulted in the soldier's own execution. They knew how to kill. It was their job. It was the machinery of the empire. That is the official defense. That is the ammunition they give you to fight the doubt. You are told to read the medical analyses of the crucifixion so that you can reassure yourself that survival was a biological impossibility. And yet, I kept staring at that short time frame. A few hours. People survived longer. People survived worse. What if the pre-shock state looked exactly like death to a first-century observer? What if the body simply shut down, entering a comatose state to preserve the last remaining functions, and to the untrained eyes of a grieving mother and terrified followers, it looked like the end? I entered this question thinking it would take an afternoon to resolve. I thought I would find a quick article, a definitive historical proof, and I could go back to sleep. It did not take an afternoon. It took months, because the moment you step outside the heavily guarded gates of orthodox theology, you realize there are completely different narratives that have survived. Narratives that were systematically hunted down and erased. Narratives that refused to die. I started reading everything I could find about the swoon theory, the idea that he simply passed out, entered a comatose state, and later revived in the cool, damp environment of the tomb. The more I read, the more my faith crumbled. I felt like I was losing my religion, page by page. It was a physical sensation, like the floor was slowly dropping out from under me. The idea that Jesus was just a man who survived an execution makes so much more sense than a magical resurrection. It is grounded in biology, in human endurance. It makes sense of the rushed burial, the spices, the secret meetings afterward. It makes sense of the terrified disciples who saw a wounded man, not a glowing deity. But accepting that meant accepting that everything I had sung in church, everything I had prayed for, was built on a misinterpretation. Or worse, a deliberate lie. It meant that the comfort I had offered to grieving friends, the certainty I had leaned on during my own darkest hours, was based on an illusion. I almost gave up right there. It was late one night. I had physical books and printed articles spread all over the table. The smell of old paper and stale coffee was overwhelming. I was exhausted. The grief of losing your faith is a heavy physical thing. It sits on your chest. It makes it hard to breathe. I thought to myself, maybe I should just close these books. Maybe I should just accept the mystery, pack all this up, put it in a box in the garage, and go back to sleep. Maybe the truth is not worth this much pain. Maybe a comfortable lie is better than an agonizing truth. Wait. Let me rephrase that. No. That is not what I thought. What I actually thought was that I was a fool for even looking. I thought I was arrogant for questioning centuries of tradition. I was terrified of what I would become if I let go of the resurrection. Who would I be without this foundational belief? But then I saw a reference to something else. Not just survival, migration. And something shifted. It was not a sudden explosion of clarity. It was a slow, creeping realization. I found Nicolas Notovitch. In 1894, he published a book called The Unknown Life of Jesus Christ. He claimed to have found ancient Tibetan manuscripts at the Hemis Monastery, manuscripts detailing the lost years. He said Jesus spent those unrecorded years studying Buddhism and Hinduism in India. I stared at that page. India. The geographical leap was staggering, from the dusty hills of Judea to the mountains of Tibet. It sounded absurd at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it resonated with a strange kind of logic. If he survived the cross, he could not stay in the Roman Empire. He would have been hunted down and executed properly. He had to leave. And where do you go to seek wisdom, to find a spiritual sanctuary far from the reach of Rome? You go east. And it was not just him. Mirza Ghulam Ahmad wrote Jesus in India in 1899, outlining the Ahmadiyya Islamic tradition's belief that Jesus survived the crucifixion and migrated to India to seek the lost tribes of Israel, ultimately dying a natural death. And then there was the Wāqiʻāt-i Kashmir, an 18th century Persian text by Khwaja Muhammad Azam Didamari. It mentions the tomb of a foreign prophet or prince named Uz Asaf in Kashmir, a site that became a modern focal point for the theory that Jesus was buried there. The Rosa Bal Shrine in Srinagar. I could not breathe for a minute. The sheer scale of the alternative narrative. It was not just a medical theory about surviving a cross. It was a completely different life, a life spent seeking wisdom in the East, far from the violent empire that tried to end him, a life that ended naturally, quietly, an old man dying of old age, buried in a peaceful shrine, instead of a young man screaming in agony on a piece of wood. But then I kept reading. Because you cannot just stop at the narrative that makes you feel good. You have to follow the evidence, even when it ruins a perfectly good story. I read Bart D. Ehrman in his 2012 book, Did Jesus Exist? The Historical Argument for Jesus of Nazareth. He classifies the accounts of Jesus traveling to India and surviving the cross as modern forgeries, hoaxes lacking any foundational historical or documentary basis. And he is right. When 19th century scholars investigated the Hemis Monastery, the head lama explicitly denied any such document existed, or that Notovitch had ever even visited. The academic consensus classifies the entire claim as a complete 19th century fabrication. So I hit a wall. The evidence for the Indian migration was fragile, fabricated even, or it makes too much sense. And that is what bothers me. I would like to not know this. Not because it is horrible, but because now, every time I look at the narrative of the early church, I see something else. I look at an empty cross, and I do not see a divine victory. I see a massive institutional cover-up. I see a desperate attempt to maintain control by silencing any narrative that deviates from the official line. This is the price of this kind of research. You do not just lose a simple belief, you lose the comfort of trusting the narrator. I realized that it does not even matter if Notovitch lied. It does not matter if the manuscripts at Hemis Monastery never existed. What matters is the absolute terror these alternative stories strike into the heart of the institution. If the truth is so solid, why the centuries of censorship? Why the need to crush any dissenting theory? Why the immense, concentrated effort to make sure that the only story anyone ever hears is the one where the empire executes a man and then God magically brings him back to life to validate a new religion? I entered this wanting a clear historical answer. I leave it with a much more uncomfortable reality. The official story might just be the one that had the political power to survive. We do not have the absolute truth. We have the version of truth approved by the empire that executed him. The same empire that later adopted his name and used it to conquer the world. You cannot unlearn that. You learn to carry it. Remember when I said I got angry because of what they omitted? I was right, but about the wrong thing. They did not just omit historical details, they omitted the human right to doubt. The pain of losing your religion is not just about losing God. It is about the deep betrayal you feel when you realize that alternative accounts, even the fabricated ones, were systematically hidden from you. The institution demanded your absolute faith while tightly controlling the boundaries of your knowledge. They told you that questioning the resurrection was a sin because they knew that if you questioned it, the entire edifice of their authority would collapse. The story of the survival, of the journey to India, of the tomb in Kashmir. It might be a hoax, but the panic it causes in orthodox circles? That is incredibly real. It shows how fragile the official dogma truly is. It hangs on a thread of enforced consensus. If you pull that thread, if you introduce even the possibility of a different outcome, the entire tapestry unravels. I am not the same person who started reading those accounts 3 months ago. I cannot go back to the pew and sing the songs with the same unthinking conviction. I cannot listen to a sermon about the empty tomb without wondering about the empty spaces in the historical record. If you want to go deeper into how these narratives were shaped and controlled, there is a pinned comment below. I put together a library, 5 volumes of research on what the church burned, the timeline of deception, and the process of breaking free. It is all there. I left the source open for anyone who needs it. I do not have a neat conclusion for you. I do not know what happened between the execution and 3 days later. But I know that the questions are more sacred than the enforced answers. I know that the human spirit's desire to find a Jesus who survived, who sought wisdom, who died a natural death in the East, speaks to our deep need for a narrative of healing, rather than a narrative of blood and sacrifice. We want a story where the human being beats the system, not a story where a divine trump card invalidates human suffering. I do not know what to do with all this, but I know I cannot stay silent about the manipulation. If you made it this far, and this kind of journey resonates with you, subscribing tells the algorithm to send you more, because I have a lot more stories that refuse to let me go. This channel exists for this kind of conversation, the kind we rarely get to have out loud. Tell me if I'm overreacting. Leave a comment if this made you think differently about the silence. Take care of yourselves. I remember the exact feeling of sitting in those wooden pews. The stained glass filtering the morning light, the collective voice of hundreds of people singing about the victory over death. It is intoxicating. It is designed to be. When you are immersed in that environment from childhood, the resurrection is not an abstract theological concept. It is the very oxygen you breathe. It is the safety net that catches you every time the cruelty of the real world becomes too much. You are taught that the Roman execution was the ultimate horror, but the empty tomb was the ultimate triumph, and the timeline was always so clean. Friday to Sunday, a neat 3-day narrative arc that solves the problem of human mortality. But when you strip away the stained glass and the hymns, when you look at the raw, unpolished history of the 1st century, the timeline stops being clean. It becomes chaotic. It becomes terrifyingly human. Let us think about the cross itself. We wear it around our necks, we put it on our buildings, but we sanitize what it actually was. Medical experts who study ancient crucifixion will tell you that it was not just a method of execution. It was a science of prolonged agony. The objective was not death. The objective was a slow, public suffocation. When they point out the severe scourging, the blood loss that led to a pre-shock state, they are describing a physiological collapse. The body is designed to survive. It will shut down non-essential functions to keep the brain and the heart going. What if, in that desperate physiological triage, the body enters a state so deep, so completely motionless, that a 1st century soldier with no modern medical training simply assumes the job is done? They had every incentive to ensure death. Failing meant their own execution. But they were also dealing with a rushed timeline, the impending Sabbath, the pressure from the local authorities to clean up the execution site. Mistakes happen in a rush, even in the Roman army. And if a mistake happened, if he survived, the entire narrative shatters. The entire foundation of Western civilization shifts. That is why the censorship is so absolute. That is why the Church could never, ever allow the swoon theory to be anything more than a heresy to be crushed. When you read about Nicolas Notovitch in 1894, you have to understand the context. He was not just publishing a book. He was dropping a bomb into the middle of Victorian religious certainty. The unknown life of Jesus Christ was an absolute scandal. He claimed to have found those ancient Tibetan manuscripts at the Hemis Monastery. He said they detailed the lost years, the years between his childhood and his ministry. He said Jesus spent them studying Buddhism and Hinduism in India. Think about the psychological impact of that claim. Jesus, not as a divine being waiting to begin a preordained mission of blood sacrifice, but as a human seeker. A man who traveled east, who sat with monks, who learned the ancient wisdom of the Vedas and the Buddha. It humanizes him in a way that orthodox theology simply cannot tolerate. It makes him a student, not a savior. And the panic was immediate. The church authorities did not just debate Notovitch, they character assassinated him. They mobilized everything they had to prove he was a fraud. And it was not just Notovitch. The Ahmadiyya Islamic tradition, led by Mirza Ghulam Ahmad in 1899, introduced another layer of terror for the Orthodox Christian. His book, Jesus in India, outlined a tradition where Jesus not only survived the cross, but actively migrated to the east to seek the lost tribes of Israel. In this narrative, he did not ascend into the clouds. He lived a long life. He grew old. He died a natural death. This is what I mean when I talk about the absolute terror these alternative stories strike into the institution. A natural death is the ultimate defeat for a theology based on a supernatural resurrection. And then there is the tomb. The Wāqiʻāt-i Kashmir, that 18th century Persian text by Khwaja Muhammad Azam Didamari. It mentions the tomb of a foreign prophet or prince named Yus Asaf. A tomb that still exists, the Rosabal Shrine in Srinagar. When I first read about the Rosabal Shrine, I spent hours just looking at pictures of it. A simple wooden lattice structure, a green cloth, a quiet place in Kashmir. Local tradition, fiercely defended by some and violently rejected by others, claims this is the final resting place of Jesus of Nazareth. The Sunni Muslim board that manages the shrine considers the claim blasphemous, just as the Christian church does. Do you see the pattern? Every major religious institution that derives its power from the official story is united in their absolute rejection of this alternative narrative. They must protect the official story at all costs, because the alternative is chaos. But then, the twist. The intellectual honesty that makes this entire process so agonizing. I had to read Bart D. Ehrman. I had to. You cannot just read the things that validate your doubts. You have to read the things that challenge them. In Did Jesus Exist? The historical argument for Jesus of Nazareth, published in 2012, Ehrman completely dismantles the India narrative. He classifies the accounts of Jesus traveling to India and surviving the cross as modern forgeries, hoaxes. He points out that when 19th century scholars finally went to investigate the Hemis Monastery, the head lama explicitly denied any such document existed. The lama said Notovitch had never even been there. The academic consensus is devastatingly clear. The entire claim is a complete 19th century fabrication. So where does that leave us? It leaves us in the worst possible place. It leaves us with fragile, fabricated evidence on one side and a massive, violently enforced institutional silence on the other. I would like to not know this. I would like to unsee the machinery of censorship. Because now, every time I look at the narrative of the early church, I do not see the hand of God preserving the truth. I see the hand of men erasing the alternatives. This is the price of deconstruction. You lose the comfort of trusting the narrator. It does not matter if Notovitch lied. It does not matter if the manuscripts at Hemis Monastery never existed. What matters is the absolute terror these alternative stories strike into the heart of the institution. If the truth of the resurrection is so solid, so historically undeniable, why the centuries of censorship? Why the need to crush any dissenting theory with such overwhelming force? You cannot unlearn that. You learn to carry it. Remember when I said I got angry because of what they omitted? I was right, but about the wrong thing. They did not just omit historical details. They omitted the human right to doubt. I do not know what to do with all this, but I know I cannot stay silent about the manipulation. Tell me if I am overreacting. Leave a comment if this made you think differently about the silence. Take care of yourselves.